Mark Carney walked into the G20 Summit in South Africa with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was about to do and silenced the critics with his shocking response.
I now want to ask His Excellency, Prime Minister of Canada, Dr. Mark Joseph Carney, to take the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to follow the Australian example. Let me start. This session is on resilience, and I want to join others who pointed out in the first session the fragility of armed conflict, condemning the Russia's illegal, unjustified, and barbaric invasion of Ukraine, the appalling conflict in Sudan, and our support for all efforts that can lead to just and lasting peace.
For weeks, critics at home and abroad kept repeating the same tired lines. Carney is too academic. Carney is too cautious. Carney doesn't have a global pull. And yet all it took was one speech, one razor-sharp, unapologetically direct intervention to silence the noise. Want to know the shocking part? His speech wasn't long. It wasn't full of hollow words. It wasn't padded with the usual diplomatic fillers. It was something far more dangerous. Clear, data-driven, and delivered with the authority of someone who had run the Bank of Canada, steered the Bank of England, chaired the Financial Stability Board, and helped design the global regulatory response after the 2008 crash. It wasn't a political talking. It was a global financial architect calling out the failures the world has been pretending not to see.
It's been over a decade that we've realized that past is not prologue with respect to climate change. In other words, the tail risks of yesterday become the central scenarios of today. Tipping points are now being realized. And I want to give an example. 2 years ago, the forest fires in Canada alone made Canada the fourth largest emitter of carbon in the world. We have the example of the Darwin cyclone. This year, forest fire damage forests bigger than Sierra Leone, to give orders of magnitude. So we need action on all levels: mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. International collaboration is crucial. I want to thank our hosts, South Africa, Mexico, and others who sent firefighters to Canada to help fight the fires.
At this point, Carney became impossible to ignore. He began by linking economic instability with climate risk, and suddenly the entire room sat up. It wasn't the usual "climate is important" line. Carney spelled out the financial math behind it. In the last decade alone, climate-linked disasters caused more than $2.8 trillion in economic losses globally. Now, for everyone who doesn't know, the year before the summit saw some of the most expensive climate events ever recorded. From Canadian wildfires burning through entire provinces to floods in South Africa and Pakistan that destroyed infrastructure that will take decades to rebuild. Anyone having an idea of the repercussions can imagine how this wasn't just a theory. This was the real economy bleeding cash. This warning hit at a moment when 2024 to 2025 is projected to break climate damage records again, with global insurers calling this the most unstable risk year in modern history. Carney wasn't predicting a crisis. He was describing one that had already begun.
Coordination through early warning systems. The wildfire satellite system that we're putting in place as part of the G7, global public good, the work of the G20 in disaster risk reduction. Nature-based solutions. We're working towards our 30-30 commitment under the Montreal Kunming Protocol. I want to support the tropical forest financing facility of Brazil's COP, as well as the broader effort, and congratulate them on that.
Spot on. Carney's emphasis on how markets were already factoring climate risk into the cost of capital and how insurance companies were walking away from regions they once covered was an arrow aimed straight for the jugular. Just imagine how much supply chain shocks from extreme weather had wiped out annual profits for dozens of multinationals in a single quarter. Global investment, he argued, wasn't waiting for governments to wake up. It was already moving.
In terms of our own mitigation, I'll just frame it as follows. We view addressing climate change as a moral duty, but also a commercial imperative, as Prime Minister Albanese just intimated. So our strategy on reducing emissions is a climate competitiveness strategy because it will make our businesses stronger. I referenced in my earlier comments blended finance. I'll just reinforce those, the importance of those efforts, including through the World Bank and beyond.
No better explanation than this. Carney was dead serious as he revealed that as climate shocks intensify, global capital is already voting with its feet. Markets are pushing up borrowing costs for regions that fail to follow suit. Infrastructure is degrading quickly, and the investors are pulling back their shares, dumping the financial burden onto families and governments. His point was undeniable. Markets won't wait for politicians to catch up, and any nation that does is effectively choosing economic downfall.
But I want to highlight a few other issues before my time is up. First, the importance of high-integrity, standardized carbon markets that have the potential to shift capital flows to those most affected by climate change, including being integrated with JETPs, such as the JETP here, changing the incentives and the financial calculations to decarbonize. I'd suggest that we can catalyze enormous private sector demand for these credits by committing AI data center development to be carbon neutral.
Absolutely brutal. Remember when critics back home had accused him of being too obsessed with climate finance? When Canada had domestic affordability issues to manage? Well, Carney certainly flipped that narrative with hard-papered numbers. He pointed out that green tech investments globally are now over $1.8 trillion, outpacing fossil fuel investments for the first time in modern history. Countries like South Korea, Germany, and Australia are attracting billions by building innovation-driven economies. Meanwhile, nations that delay adaptation are experiencing higher food prices, higher infrastructure costs, and weaker investor confidence, the exact issues Canadians are feeling. Another thing to note is that Canadians are already seeing the fallout. Rising insurance premiums in climate-exposed regions, supply chain shortages pushing up grocery prices, and infrastructure repairs draining provincial budgets. Carney's argument was blunt. Ignoring climate economics doesn't make life cheaper for Canadians. It makes it far more expensive.
We need a price on carbon. I salute my neighbor, the European Union, in pricing carbon and putting in place a CBAM. I'm going to conclude by drawing attention to the situation of one of the members around this table, and I hope Prime Minister Holness of Jamaica will allow me. The economic cost of Hurricane Melissa is about 40% of Jamaica's GDP. Now, through remarkable discipline, Jamaica had reduced their debt to GDP by over 50 percentage points in recent years. That is all gone with the explosive hurricane. This demonstrates the importance of investing in resilience in advance, the importance of catastrophic risk insurance, and the reality of what climate change is doing to our countries. I salute the ambition of the G20 presidency, Turkey for hosting COP alongside Australia next year. Thank you, Chair.
Carney's message was simple. Canada could compete with the leaders or fall behind with the laggards. There was no middle ground. And he wasn't shy about Canada's role. He positioned the country as one of the few that can provide stable energy, critical minerals, AI research, food security, and climate-resistant infrastructure on a global scale. While critics often portray Canada as too small to lead, Carney reminded the world that Canada is the 5th largest energy producer, one of the largest suppliers of nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements, and home to some of the world's leading AI labs. Far from being a secondary player, Canada sits at the crossroads of the industries that will define the next 50 years. Carney's critics had insisted that he didn't have the voice, the stature, or the instincts to stand on the world stage and command attention. But we all saw a different story in South Africa, where he proved them wrong in real time. He didn't raise his voice, nor his course. He didn't change his course. He simply told the world Canada was back, not as a symbolic player, not as a polite observer, but as a country with strategy, leverage, and global relevance. It showed that Canada could speak with authority on finance, climate, energy, supply chains, and investment. And most importantly, he erased the outdated idea that Canada should wait for bigger nations to set the pace. In Johannesburg, Carney made it unmistakably clear. Canada isn't following the world anymore. It's competing to shape it.